everybody. How's it going? Sorry if I'm looking a little flushed. It's awfully hot out here in Osaka, Japan. Summer is in full swing, full humidity, 95 plus degree heat. It's tough, 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 but I'm gonna make it through. Anyway, I wanted to do a little video, a brief video of, hopefully by my standards, to update for Private Eye in July, Jim at Mystery and Mayhem's Cool event. I'm one of the co-hosts. And I dropped a video a while back about profiling or looking at the big book of, the Black Lizard Big Book of Black Mass Stories, edited by Otto Penzler. That was a really cool book. And now I want to talk about a couple of novels that I've read for this event. First off, I read Traps Need Fresh Bait. This is the 28th out of 30 Bertha Cool and Donald Lam Private Eye detective novels written by Erle Stanley Gardner. Now, Erle Stanley Gardner is, of course, most famous for his character Perry Mason. He created the lawyer, the crack lawyer Perry Mason, who never loses a case unless he somehow tricks his clients into confessing that they're guilty. I think that happens at least once in the TV show. Anyway, he wrote, dozens and dozens of Perry Mason novels, Gardner did. And that was a massively successful character and series, and it spawned, of course, the great TV series from the 50s and 60s starring Raymond Burr as Perry Mason. And, of course, there was a more recent, I believe, HBO, Showtime, some kind of cable channel adaptation, which played a little more fast and loose, I think, with the source material. While I like the Perry Mason books and think they're really cool and want to read more of those, the series of Gardner's that I really enjoy, right up my alley, is the Cool and Lam detective series, of which this is one. Now, let me talk a little bit about Cool and Lam. Now, I did do a shelf tour of several of my books that I have of this series. There's 30 in all, like I mentioned. I believe they span from the 30s up until like 1970. This one's from 1967, Traps Need Fresh Bait. Now, Donald Lam is a former attorney. If I recall, he was disbarred for coming up with a kind of legal loophole that was considered not exactly on the up and up, which he uses to good effect in that first novel. But anyway, he was disbarred, and so he looks for work. He's hard up for work, and in the first book, he becomes a member of the Bertha Cool Detective Agency. Now, Bertha Cool is a kind of flowsy, browsy, overweight, but tough as nails, tough as old boot leather, kind of middle-aged lady. And she basically has, she's all about the money, all about the business, has jewels all over her fingers, and is, greedy little tough eyes. And she is so impressed with Donald in that first book after his legal legerdemain that he comes up with to solve that case and make the company and their client come out in clover, despite some very narrow scrapes with the law. And by this point in book 28, they are full-fledged partners all the way. Donald Lam does his own thing, though. He's a very interesting sort of PI. He is tough as nails mentally, but he's a kind of physical lightweight. They're kind of sometimes clashing, sometimes assisting local police detective. These are set in LA, by the way. Los Angeles. I believe his name is Lieutenant Sellers. He calls Lam pint-sized. Bertha says about Lam, he's a brainy little bastard and things like that, grudging admiration. He is super, super sharp. I don't think he lands more than one single punch in the whole series. I think one of the later books, he supposedly trains with a former boxer or someone who's good at fighting, and he lands one knockout blow, but that's about it in the series. He is not a physical tough guy. As far as he can take a licking and keep coming, he's very, tough and tenacious, but he's not a fighter. What he is a genius for coming up with not always 100% legal, skirting the law a little bit, ways to find true killers and get his clients fat out of the fire. And that happens in this book. It starts off with him it's his birthday. And the secretary, Elsie Brand, of course, who happens to be an attractive blonde, like there are always in these novels, it seems like. Elsie Brand, who was super aloof in the first Cool and Lam book, but now is just besotted with Lam. that he has a real way with women, even though he's not a big guy, he's not a tough guy. He kind of knows how a way to treat women without, you know, gentlemanly, but still having a little bit of a vibe going on there that they can pick up on. But he doesn't chase them. They seem to like that. And Elsie Brand is she's baked a birthday cake for Lam and plants a bunch of smooches on him when everyone's out of the office. But unfortunately, during the opening birthday party scene, they're interrupted by a client. And of course, Bertha Cool, mercenary as she is not going to pass up a chance to make a buck for the firm, and pulls Donald in. And this man is named Barney Adams, and he supposedly represents, again, you're never quite sure what these clients are going to be up to with a PI case, but he supposedly represents a firm of lawyers from New Mexico, and they're looking into they want Lam to investigate and maybe pose as someone who is willing to be perjured. There's ads in the paper for someone who will get $300 if they say they saw this accident happen a certain way, which is exactly opposite of what it did happen. In other words, they're looking for, as Lam figures out, a witness willing to perjure themselves for money, someone hard up. He's a little too slick in his approach to get through to the second phase of the interview. He goes and interviews with this group that's doing this. And immediately after him, a very attractive, stunning blonde walks in, and he could tell right away that he doesn't have a chance now to get his toehold in this scheme for getting this $300 he's trying to get more dope on what they're up to. Why are they trying to do this whole scenario? But the woman is kind of a recently jilted woman was hanging out with this guy that she thought was marrying her, but he was actually a bigamist and left her in the lurch and ran off with a bunch of her money. And she's come to LA because this guy has won the sweepstakes, and she's hoping to crack some money out of him. But right now she's got 35 cents to her name, and that's it. And so, of course, she's going to be one that they're going to take advantage of, this group, whatever they're up to. Lam quickly sizes that up, approaches her, buys her dinner, pretty soon has her ensconced in an apartment. A second apartment he's picked up as part of this case. And, before long, she is kind of suspect number one in the murder of the shooting death of a wealthy lawyer who's somehow embroiled in a construction bid scam situation. And so Donald Lam has to go to the mat to try to get her out of trouble, and as well as himself in trouble. She's staying in his apartment with a briefcase full of 40 grand, which is money that was meant for a down payment on the bid that this deceased lawyer had in his house. So all sorts of shenanigans ensue, and really cool, fun, tricksy plot. Lam is always thinking about 16 moves ahead of anyone else, but even he gets up against it a couple times in this. Again, not a lot of physical action, but there is some at the end. Donald's not the type of guy who's going to ever muss around or push around any woman. So when there's a kind of a femme fatale in the case that is up to no good, he calls in Bertha, and Bertha has no compunction but to throw this little femme fatale, lady around like a sack of potatoes until they can figure out what she's up to, and she's up to no good. Anyway, this one was a lot of fun, really slick, fast-paced. I recommend any of these Cool Lam books. This is the latest in the series I've read. You'll see this kind of, is this a photo? I can't tell. This looks like maybe a photo cover, one of these cheesy 70s photo covers or late 60s photo covers. This is a pocketbook edition. It's got the little kangaroo there. But anyway, I love the pocketbooks editions. These regular mass market ones are okay. I much prefer the silver and gold edge stubby or stumpy ones. I prefer those, and I've got several Cool Lam books in that livery. But sorry for the old ABC Books sticker. I haven't got that off yet. Sticker's the bane of the used book buyer's existence. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. And then this past weekend, I read this nice Green Penguin edition, very old and not, a little bit rough around the edges, but eminently readable and very, comfortable to hold and use. Green Penguin of The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler. Now, this is a Philip Marlowe novel. I love, love, love Philip Marlowe and Raymond Chandler. The guy writes like a dream. And, this might not be as packed full of amazing similes and metaphors and dialogue and crackling prose as some of the more famous Marlowe novels like The Big Sleep or The Long Goodbye. But this one is really good and a cool mystery and still beautifully written. This was the fourth Marlowe book that was published in 1943. Chandler was on a roll just kicking these out, boom, 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 in the early 40s. And this one, and here's a picture of Mr. Chandler on the back there. Now, I think this particular copy, Penguin copy, I think it was originally published by Penguin in 1949, and this one is a 1952 edition. So this book is what, 74 years old or so? Pretty good for a so-called flimsy mass market paperback. Penguin makes them well, or made them well anyway. Now, this book, like many of Raymond Chandler's Marlowe novels, was filmed, later made into a film. This one was directed by and starred an actor called Robert Montgomery, who does a fantastic job as Marlowe. He's a very different than usual Marlowe. And the movie is very different in that this is not a traditional movie. It's filmed from Marlowe's point of view. This was Robert Montgomery's kind of gimmick, I guess, for the movie. Stars Audrey Totter. I forgot who some of the other actors or actresses were in it, but it's really good. It's filmed in crisp black and white. You only ever see Robert Montgomery's face as Marlowe in a mirror shot. There's a shot where he's looking at the love interest, Audrey Totter's character, and he's looking in her mirror. Or perhaps it's another suspect he's investigating or interviewing, I don't know, but you see his face in the mirror, and that's the only glimpse you see of the actor playing Marlowe, and who happens to be the director, Robert Montgomery, through the whole picture. The rest of it is just his point of view, including fights and car crashes and stuff. It's set in Christmas time, which makes it a kind of interesting Christmas movie, or at least a sideways sort of Christmas movie. The plot is quite different in a lot of ways in the movie than it is in the book. The book is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about it. This is set in L.A., of course. Marlowe is an L.A. detective, although a lot of this is set in some fictionalized versions. There's a place called Bay City, which is full of corrupt cops that Marlowe tangles with, and also a mountain resort area that Marlowe spends a fair amount of time in this book investigating the case. So Marlowe is hired by a wealthy guy called Darris Kingsley, and this man, he runs some kind of perfume company, I guess, and he has an aloof and attractive secretary who he obviously is dallying with. And he wants Marlowe to find his missing wife, whose name is Crystal Kingsley. And he said she was last seen up in this mountain cabin area. I think it's called Little Fawn Lake or something. And she's been missing a month. And then Marlowe's like, why haven't you reported this to the police? And he's like, I don't want any, notoriety. The old refrain we hear in these kind of novels. They don't want the police involved. And apparently they were on the outs. They haven't lived, together for a long time. She is fast and loose and kind of a irresponsible lady. Likes the men, likes to get involved. She's apparently involved with this guy called Chris Lavery, kind of a playboy, handsome, pretty boy guy who likes the ladies a little too much and kind of a gigolo type of a guy. Supposedly, Crystal Kingsley had skipped town and left Fawn Lake. She was last seen up there, and then she supposedly sent a telegram from Mexico City that she was getting married to Chris Lavery, but now Chris Lavery denies any of that ever happening. Anyway, Marlowe starts poking around, and he gets rousted by some cops. The neighbor of Chris Lavery seems to a doctor who maybe peddles dope to the rich and famous, or gives them the injections when they need it, when they're freaking out or bringing them down or whatever. And maybe was involved in the murder of his wife, and he's getting suspicious of Marlowe. And so Marlowe starts tying all sorts of things together. He heads up to this Little Fawn Lake and talks to to kind of see where the last place where she was, where Kingsley's wife was. And he kind of first listens to and then kind of goes back and forth with, I guess, this caretaker of the lake cabins named Bill Chess. And Bill Chess had a wife who happened to look a little bit like Mrs. Kingsley, and that she was kind of a hot blonde number, small, thin, and kind of fast. Anyway, she also ran off and left Bill, Bill Chess, this caretaker guy who's got a crippling injury from the war. There's some wartime elements since this was published in 1943. There's talk of sometimes blackouts and guards going across the dam up there on the way up there. And again, all of this is beautifully described in Chandler's rich prose. Anyway, before long, both Bill Chess and Marlowe happen to see something that looks like an arm. They're kind of standing, contemplating the lake, and they're standing on this dock or this pier, and then something down in the water flashes, and Marlowe's like, "What's that?" And then the other guy, Chess, looks down there. It seems like an arm floating out. He takes a big rock, actually, and tosses it down, this heavy rock, so that it knocks part of the planks, and the body comes out. And it happens to be a blonde woman wearing the jewelry and clothes of this Muriel Chess, the caretaker's wife, who had supposedly got sick of his drinking and carousing and ran off on a month before. And of course, he's distraught. The local sheriff, who seems like he's maybe moves slow like a turtle, but he's actually a sharp customer, starts to investigate and ends up having to arrest this Chess guy on suspicion of murder. But Marlowe suspects there's a lot more to it than that, and there certainly is. Marlowe has a real tough time in this one. As usual, he solves the case, and this case the book covers a couple of days, but it's in a very active case. Marlowe doesn't get hardly any rest. I don't think he hardly gets any food. I think he gets, more than his share of being sapped by blackjacks and all sorts of problems, car chases, corrupt cops beating on him, confronting all sorts of craziness. But at the end, of course, he figures out who the killer is, and a poetic justice is kind of served out, not by Marlowe, although he pinpoints the person. Before the end of this book, 4 bodies will have hit the floor. It's pretty twisty, pretty great. The plot, seasoned mystery writers will probably figure some elements out, but Chandler's really good at spinning a lot of plates in the air and going this way and that way and kind of wrong-footing you here and there, so you may not come to the realization of who exactly the killer is until the very end, or killers of various sides in this case. It's a very good book. I highly recommend any Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe novel. They're all great. And, some of the ones like The High Window or The Little Sister, they're a little less well known, but they're certainly worth pursuing. Even if they've never read them, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with titles like Farewell, My Lovely, or The Long Goodbye, or, of course, The Big Sleep. But some of these other less well-known titles are just as worthwhile reading. Even the last one, Playback, which I believe is considered not, slightly inferior to Chandler's other ones. I think he was ill when he was writing it, but I remember really enjoying that one too. So the guy could hardly put out a sentence that didn't crackle. I want to read just a little snippet, if I can find it in here. Marlowe discovers a body, and, as usual, as most detectives do, goes into a place, searches for it, the door's slightly open, he senses something's not quite right. The guy in question is someone who would probably be ripe for a killing. Anyway, nobody yelled or ran out of the door. Nobody blew a police whistle. Everything was quiet and sunny and calm. No cause for excitement whatever. It's only Marlowe finding another body. He does it rather well by now. Murder-a-day Marlowe, they call him. They have the meat wagon following him around to follow up on the business he finds. A nice enough fellow in an ingenious sort of way. I walked back to the intersection and got into my car and started it and backed it and drove away from there. And of course, Marlowe will eventually, tell the cops about the body, but he wants to be talked to his client first. Again, he's very, he's a very shrewd fellow. He's, very controlled. He sometimes has a little dalliance with an attractive lady, but not in this book. There are some ladies that he's flirting with here and there, and talks about their attractiveness, but, in his narration. Again, Marlowe's just a really likable character, a tough Seamus that, knows the game, knows all the dirty corners, but stays untarnished and pure in his own way. But he's tough and gritty, and gets his elbows dirty when he needs to. He really has some close calls in this one, and it's a hell of a read. That's The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler. So that's all I've got so far for PI in July. I hope to get to some more stories, short stories, or novels before the end of the month. We're about halfway through now. In the meantime, I hope you're enjoying what you're reading so far, either for this event or whatever else you happen to be reading. Until the next video, I'll talk to you again. Take care, happy reading, and we'll see you later.